This time of year is really crucial for NBA GMs, especially when all these players could potentially be on the move. Rosters blowing it up, making a, run, buying a player, overpays, all types of stuff happen at the NBA trade deadline. And I think there's four teams right now that are in a really hard spot. They're kind of stuck in the middle. And when you are the GM of one of those teams, the question always is it time to buy or is it time to sell? And so these four teams that I think really have a tough decision, right? Because teams like the Warriors and the Lakers, they're buying, right? I know they're mid at the deadline. Those guys are not getting shipped out. LeBron, AD, Curry, those guys aren't getting shipped out. They are buying. They are making a championship push. But some of these other teams might be not so sure. The first team I want to look at, I think, could go a couple of different ways. Really, obviously, the buying and selling, but who are they buying? Who are they selling? That team would be the Atlanta Hawks because DeJounte Murray's name has been thrown around in some trade rumors. Personally, I think the Hawks should try to buy. I don't think you really have a choice. And if you have like a guy like Trae Young on your team, there's only so many seasons of losing that they can put up with. Obviously, the Hawks made that conference finals run after the bubble. People are calling that run fraudulent. Last year, they got eliminated by the Celtics in the first round. Obviously, that's a tough draw, but still, you have to look at it this way and simply say, hey, we are not good enough. We're not good enough, and we like Trae Young. As the Atlanta Hawks, we like Trae Young. DeJounte Murray and him, they don't mix well, at least not well enough to make it to the second round, let alone make it to the conference finals again. And overall, you need a change. You need something. A lot of people are pointing at the coach. I think Quinn Snyder is doing great, honestly. Obviously, not amazing. Getting a different type of personnel around Trae Young would be pretty interesting. Pascal Siakam's the name that goes around everywhere because Toronto's definitely going to be blowing it up. Maybe not the full way, but they need to start their rebuild around Scotty Barnes and stop playing this middleman game because NBA purgatory is the worst spot you could possibly be in. I'm going to make a totally separate video about NBA purgatory, what happens to a lot of these smaller, medium market teams that can't get that big player. But all of that aside, looking exactly at the Atlanta Hawks, they need to buy. And even if they're selling DeJounte Murray, they're not selling him like back to the Spurs for some first round picks. Like they are moving him, upgrading, getting bench depth. Like they are building a good roster. You cannot stress this enough. Trae Young does not want to lose, and he is going to go somewhere where he can win. He is not going to be the Bradley Beal, Kemba Walker, like stuck on a garbage team, Damian Lillard. Like, he's not going to do that. He's just not. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. That guy seems like he wants to win to me. And he has had some pretty good playoff performances, obviously, some bad ones too. Overall, that's a guy you need to build around, and you need to give him something to work with. You experimented with DeJounte Murray, it didn't work. Maybe you ship him out, maybe you don't. Whatever you have to do, you got to get a guy like Pascal Siakam on your team, someone that you think can benefit the Atlanta Hawks right now, that's going to help them flip their season around and start winning some games. Now we look at a team like the Chicago Bulls. To me, this is a really difficult one because now you have a guy like Kobe White who's starting to break out, maybe not an all-star, but making an all-star push, certainly looks to be a highly skilled basketball player. And you say, is this a guy that we can rebuild around? Is this a guy who helps us win now? What do the Bulls do? You're, looking at the DeRozan situation. Do you bring him back? Do you keep trying to run it back with this team? Where does Vucevic go in potential deals? Where does LaVine go? Reports are that, LaVine and the Bulls would both be happy to separate. And while that's obviously up to speculation, he has a pretty big contract. I don't know what you're getting in return for Zach LaVine. If you can get some first, you have to overhaul the whole roster, essentially, at that point. You have to go full sell. It really sucks with the Lonzo Ball situation because when they were competing, Lonzo was starting for them. And that was really the glue guy that got all those stars together to work. DeRozan was looking like a bona fide number one option. I mean, people had him in top 10 talks at that point. Everyone forgets, but that stretch of back-to-back game winners, he really like got thrust into some conversations that he probably didn't belong in, but that's okay. When you're looking at Chicago, you can't just sell a couple pieces because most of these guys are at the best value they're going to be at. They're going to regress from here. Maybe not LaVine, but definitely DeRozan, definitely Vucevic. These guys are at their highest value. Maybe LaVine gets more valuable. Maybe you sign like a smaller extension. I doubt it. But when you have Zach LaVine, he's not going to stick around if you're selling the rest of it. My thing with the Chicago Bulls, Lonzo is not coming back fast enough. He is not going to save this team. In my opinion, it's time to sell for Chicago. The third team that we're looking at here is the Brooklyn Nets. And a lot of people think that they can build around Mikal Bridges. Doesn't look like Mikal is going to be that number one guy. It's unfortunate because, after you watched him in Phoenix, you thought, oh, maybe he's being held back. Kind of feels like he is a third option on a really, really good team, second option on, the Knicks type of deal. Like he could be the Julius Randle to someone's Jalen Brunson. I like Mikal Bridges a lot. I think Brooklyn has a lot of pieces that they can sell right now that are going to be beneficial for championship teams. Mikal is definitely one that like maybe you send him to Philly. I don't know. That would be fun, I feel like. Cam Johnson's another that I could see getting sold at the deadline. Just good players with championship experience that at the end of the day aren't really role players, but they're not stars either. It's just really hard with that in between of like, where do they fit? And really, I think a team like Milwaukee could benefit, especially off of Cam Johnson. Like if they got him at the deadline, that's a huge win for them. The Nets just seem to have like all of the right pieces for a championship team except for the number one guy. And that really hurts Brooklyn because where they're at is, they're one of the medium teams in the East. They're sort of in the play-in race. They could tank. They could try and go get somebody and consolidate their talent and make a push, but especially after how they got handled by Philly last year in the playoffs, I just feel like it's time to sell. It really sucks because they had Kyrie and KD and Harden all together, and then injuries obviously got them knocked out in the second round, and you almost wonder, well, what could have happened? What would have? It's all in the past, and unfortunately, it looks like Brooklyn might have to sell and go into yet another rebuild. The final team I want to talk about is the Utah Jazz, and they are probably the hardest decision to make right now because for me, they're on a roll. Like looking at their last like games here, they were at the bottom of the standings and now they're in the play-in race in the West, which is really impressive for them. What do you do? Now that you're having all this success, does it really make sense to get rid of a guy like Lauri Markkanen? I think if I was Utah, what I would want if I was to give up someone like Lauri, who's such a big piece of my team, I would need young players in exchange. And I don't find that there's many contenders that have that guy that you can give up. It would probably take a guy like Jaden Ivey. And I know Detroit doesn't want to do that, especially now that Cade is injured. But for Utah, why would you give up that guy? Right? Like you're not just going to give him a pennies on the dollar. Like there's no reason for Utah to do that. They're not buyers, but you almost feel like they shouldn't sell either unless the sale is just too good to pass up. I would say that Utah probably the third option here that I didn't talk about, stay put. I think Utah should honestly stay put and that should be their mindset. Just because I think Utah should stay put does not mean that I think that they shouldn't sell if the price is right. But they should not be looking to sell necessarily. And if they go into the trade deadline with that mindset, they're going to get the maximum value out of the players they have that are interesting to other teams. Guys like Kelly Olynyk could also be on the move. Definitely people like that, role players that have experience that you could send to a team that's in the stage where they just need another competitive player to add to their team, get a little better. I'm sure a team like Golden State, maybe Milwaukee, I don't know, would be interested in a Kelly Olynyk type of player. But the Jazz realistically don't make moves just to make moves. And that goes for every team in the league for sure, but especially Utah. You're in a really good spot right now. You've taken down some pretty damn good teams in the last couple of games here. I think Utah, just stay put, ride the wave, see what happens. And if you can sell for top dollar, you sell. And that's kind of how Danny Ainge runs it anyway. So looking at that, I think that's probably where they're going to be. I'm pretty excited for the trade deadline. There's a lot of names that could get moved that I feel people are going to be really interested where they end up, because not all these guys are going to have the perfect fit, but I'm sure there's going to be some of these guys that go to a place, and if they don't win a championship, they surely thrust that team into championship contention. I think that the trade deadline right now has a lot of underrated moves coming, and I'm really excited to see how all that unfolds.